Snakes. Animals ranging from tiny to gigantic, from harmless to deadly, from despised to revered. Fear of snakes served the ancestors of humanity well, as most of them hide exceptionally well, and a single bite can mean certain death. But for a lot of people, being afraid of something only makes it more intriguing. Imagination wanders and warps, burning creatures far more potent than the animals they are based on. Such is the origin of the flying serpents I have gathered for this video. It is probably obvious from the title, but combining flight with deadly snakes is not a rare idea, and has happened countless times over history. We have an assortment to cover today, most of whom follow a very similar idea. Just like with the Urus or Antelope's episode, I realized that these creatures are far too similar to cover individually, so if I don't do it now, I probably never will. Still, the Jaculus is one that can enjoy most of the spotlight, mostly because we are at the letter J. I wouldn't say it is particularly well developed, but at least it has a high number of mentions throughout history. So what is the Jaculus really? Well, it is a snake, obviously. A snake with wings and sometimes 4 legs. According to depictions at the very least. The earlier sources do not mention anything of the flight apparatus, simply that it does fly. I'm not saying it's not intuitive, just that it might not have been part of the original design. One of the earliest mentions of the Jaculus we have, or rather the Jaculus as it is often spelled, comes from Lucan's Pharsalia, funnily enough. The book itself tells the story of the civil war between Caesar and Pompey, but has a section talking about deadly serpents. It just so happens that the Jaculus was described there. So the Jaculus is not just a flying snake, but one that launches itself at its victims from trees and kills not with venom, but the brute force of its impact. The stone flung from a sling, or the flight of a Parthian arrow, seems sluggish in comparison to its impressive speed. While there are a few conflicting accounts we'll discuss, this is the blueprint for the beast. This is in fact why it is called the Jaculus, which means thrown or shot in Latin, often used when referencing javelins. One of the alternate names is indeed javelin snake. Quite fitting. Pliny also mentions the snake in his natural history, but adds no new information, simply likening the speed of the snake to something hurled by an engine. On the Characteristics of Animals by Aelian mentions the snake by the name Acontius, but likewise does not go into any more details. Solinus's De Mirabilibus Mundi differs only from the previous citations in that he describes the Jaculus as piercing its prey rather than using blunt force, a bite, or claws. Isidore of Seville adds one more tidbit in etymologies, stating that the jaculi spring themselves up instead of climbing the trees they attack from. Thomas of Cantimpré cites Solinus in Liber de Natura Rerum, but actually adds more information as he specifically mentions wings. He also calls the snake Psalm. Lastly, a dragon called Jaculus appears in the Volsung saga. Both Ingvar and his son Svein faced this legendary foe in battle, with only the latter succeeding in killing it. While it is a serpentine creature that spews venom, the naming is likely just a coincidence. That is pretty much all there is to the Jaculus. There are secondary sources that state things like jaculi collecting shiny things, or them having 2 tongues, one with barbs, but they either cite the wrong primary source or misattributed the entry of a different beast to the javelin snake. The fact that it is so often mentioned would make one believe that there is something to the myths, but the fact that every mention is so vague also raises suspicion of how many first-hand accounts exist. Associating the Jaculus with actual flying snakes might make sense on an intuition level, but few things align with the two creatures. The Chrysopelae are exclusive to Southeast Asia. They also glide, not really launch themselves at stuff. Plus, no sign of limbs or wings either, even though those are not a necessity. The Jaculus is imagined to spring head or tail first at unsuspecting prey, goring flesh or fracturing bone. Even though the lack of a potent venom and an arboreal habitat somewhat fit the bill, that's woefully little to make a connection with any certainty. The thing is, not all imaginary creatures need to be based on a real animal. It is likely that our winged serpent is an amalgamation of human fear, the arboreal nature of some snakes, and a good dose of creativity. With all that said, it is quite possible that the Jaculus itself was inspiration for some other flying noodles. Potentially 3, according to what I found. The first one I'd note is the siren, sometimes spelled siren or sirena. While they share a name with the Greek lady, but also a bird or fish creature, they couldn't be further apart. The oldest mention is probably by Isidore of Seville. In the very same work, he talks about the Jaculus. The main difference between the two snakes is that the siren has venom, a venom so potent that it kills the victim before they feel the bite. It is a bit reminiscent of how the Jaculus murders at the moment of impact, but quite distinct. Sirens also live exclusively in Arabia and are more active flyers than tree dwellers. They are also said to be faster than a horse, even by slithering. Thomas of Cantimpré also muddles the waters a bit by stating that only some of them have wings. That would mean that we are not talking about a single species, but this is a weird statement on its own. They are also white in the pictures, and most secondary sources seem to agree on this as a universal fact. The other two creatures are both mentioned by Albertus Magnus in De Animalibus, and are almost identical. The first is the Altinanity, which is described as short, slender and small, but also rather sly and aggressive. Like the Jaculi, they hide on trees and pounce at prey beneath, but not always. They also strike from their dens and even sally forth to attack if they grow frustrated in waiting. Unlike the Jaculus, they kill with venom, not blunt force or stabbing. The only other distinctive characteristic they have is their reddish hue, which could potentially cue us into what animals they might be. This was just foreshadowing for what's to come. There's still the other, almost identical snake. The Cafezatus is also a small, short, reddish snake that is aggressive and kills with venom. The only difference is that they live on trees and not just occasionally climb up them. That's it. Now, it is quite possible that these snakes present in European bestiaries all share their origin in the fantasy of the Jaculus. However, this cannot be said about the next snake we will talk about. It is the Fendrafiola, a Madagascar snake of terrible reputation and a distinctly half-red body. As the Malagasy story goes, Fendrafiolas hunt from treetops. They wait for people or zebu to walk underneath, then stiffen their body and drop at them like a spear. These snakes are rather successful hunters, as their telltale sign is dried blood on their tail, or more so, half of their body. Here's an image of one. Indeed, Fendrafiola are real, except they are called Ichthyosiphus and are a full-blown genus, not a single animal. Also, as you might have guessed, they are not living javelins. They kill with venom, which is potentially dangerous to humans as well, so keeping your distance is still advised. The Fendrafiola is not the only supposed stabby snake on Madagascar either. The Malagasy leaf-nosed snake also carries the grim reputation. Beside their particularly pointed nose, they also tend to hang from trees, imitating branches. Their noses are too soft to hurt anyone bigger than a fly, and they aren't keen on hurting themselves by plunging headfirst towards the ground. Still, it is not difficult to see where the legends come from. And now we reach the part of the video where similarities really start falling off like Jaculus from a tree. However, as I've noted before, some of these creatures only have this one chance to appear in this obscure YouTube series. I wouldn't want to deny them this opportunity. The first of the two has quite a bit of lore, arguably more than the Jaculus. In fact, I already snuck it into a poll back in season 1. It is the winged serpent of Arabia. The name is quite descriptive. They are small and colorful snakes with wings. Like the sirens, they too are restricted to the same landmass, though not for a lack of trying. At the beginning of spring, they try to migrate, attempting to cross to Egypt. Apparently, there is a narrow mountain pass on their migratory route. However, ibises invariably kill them when they begin their crossing. Herodotus, in his histories, mentions how he saw innumerable bones and backbones of serpents many heaps of backbones, great and small and even smaller. Since the snakes themselves are believed to be highly aggressive, the Egyptians greatly revered the ibises for their service, it probably has more to do with them being a manifestation of Thoth. Either way, there's quite a bit more. Arabians, according to Herodotus, struggle gathering frankincense, as the trees are infested with winged serpents, which attack any would-be harvesters. People burn storax to smoke the little beasts out from the canopies. Apparently, this is the only thing that can drive them away from guarding their homes. And what do they do in their homes, you ask? Well, Herodotus gives us a vivid picture about how the snakes copulate. While the male is in the act of procreation, and as soon as he has ejaculated his seed, the female seizes him by the neck and does not let go until she has bitten through. He also notes that the male dies during this mating ceremony, but vengeance is not far for the female. According to him, the offspring kill their mother from the inside specifically to avenge their father, who died when they were nothing but sperm. There is also an odd assumption that this deadly breeding method is their punishment for harming people. As if this wasn't enough, Alien took his opportunity to make the snakes even weirder. He claims that their urine causes festering wounds if it falls onto someone, plus that they are nocturnal, but that's a lesser detail compared to acid piss. The next flying serpent I have for you is a lot more straightforward. It is the heraldic python. Here's an erect python for your pleasure. It isn't an actual python, it's even spelled differently. This one is specifically a bat-winged snake used in heraldry. Not to be confused with the winged serpent, which has feathers. This one is basically stand-in for a wyvern and generally represents cunning. Also, it is sometimes referred to as a Jaculus, so there is some connection, if only superficial, as this is not an actual creature with lore. Unlike the last one, maybe. I have only read about this one in a single book and not the most trustworthy one. With no other sources to go on, and the internet lacking any references not drowned out by biblical stories and theological ponderings, I'd say we should all take the next creature with a massive boulder of salt. I present to you the Flying Serpent of Isa. This would have been a lot more dramatic if I'd have found an image of this creature. Either way, it is apparently a snake from medieval Christian legends that could fly, as the name suggests. It is also said to be the most venomous of all serpents, most likely due to a technicality. You see, during the era this monster was made up, the basilisk already had its assortment of chimeric forms we know and love today, one of which plays quite an important role here, if I do say so myself. This particular snake is hatched from nothing less than the egg of a cockatrice. Yeah, I may be a bit biased for including this dubious creature. Either way, this sentence alone has quite the significance. As you might know, cockatrices do not reproduce. In fact, there is a belief that all of them are male. There are a couple versions when it comes to what exactly has to occur to make a cockatrice, but it all starts with the egg of a rooster, which potentially mated with a snake, and a toad incubating the product. Roosters tend not to lay eggs, even if they were to get the D from a snake. Now, egg-like abdominal mass can develop for roosters, which might be the cause for this belief. Granted, it is likely just to point out the incredible nature of my kind's progeny. So, if we go for actual eggs, it takes 3 impossibilities to make a serpent of Isa. First, the rooster snake genetic compatibility, then the rooster egg. Then, basically, another rooster egg from the hatchling. Apparently, these strange creatures are native to Ethiopia. I guess roosters over there are built different. Anyway, I just wanted to share this weird little thing with barely any evidence backing it up. Alright, it's time we move on to making the realistic Jaculus. Just to be clear, listing all of the other winged snakes was just for fun. Well, my fun at least. I'm still going to treat the Jaculus as the main topic of the video. So, where do we even start with making this a reality? It would be ideal to establish which version we are going with. So, the wingless flying serpent is, well, it's just a glider outside of its home territory. that's too easy. Having only the wings is a bit too hard though. A snake's body is not ideal for takeoff, and even if it is a more elaborate glider, it has to have had 4 limbs to begin with. I don't see why getting rid of the useful front limbs would be a benefit if they aren't real flyers, and if they cannot launch themselves into the air, they are not real flyers. Powered flight for a snake is pointless, really. Their body does not have what it takes to remain stiff while flapping about. They do not have the right muscle structure to flap about in the first place. Flying does not do them much good, as they cannot really hunt with any level of precision. They can hardly latch onto anything either. The best it can do for them is ease of traversal among trees, but gliding requires a lot less for the same benefit. Additionally, if they have wings, they aren't snakes in the first place. Re-evolving limbs is a highly unlikely prospect at this point, or at least it is for as long as animals with limbs out of the box exist. At this point, you might have discerned that I do want to add the front legs too. Yes, the end result will not be a snake, but something rather unique. So, a long body, small front limbs, and membranous hind legs that can assist in flight or gliding. Some of you might have already guessed where I'm going with this. A Charopteryx-like creature. Charopterygidae is a family containing weird little reptiles that had membranes on their hind legs. It is highly likely that they use their legs for gliding, which makes them quite unique and just what we need for a realistic Jaculus. We currently know of 2 species belonging to this family, of which Ozimec volans has several fossil records, while Charopteryx has a single holotype. It is theorized they use their powerful hind legs to launch themselves from an elevation and glide, potentially from tree to tree, kind of like a cross between a grasshopper and a Draco lizard. However, it is unclear if their front limbs had any membranous additions. While it is possible, that is not an optimal feature for us. You see, we could have the fantastical image of a flying snake with front legs, as the glider legs would be the wings, but if there is a continuous membrane stretching between all limbs, that makes them more of a prehistoric paper airplane if anything. If you look at modern gliders, and even bats, the importance of a large continuous surface is quite useful. However, for this family, it is widely believed that the arms might have been nothing more than stabilizers. It is difficult to say for sure. We do know that at least Ozimec had hollow bones, which made them rather light. So it is entirely plausible they had all the tools necessary to efficiently glide without the extra, for lack of a better word, wingspan. That is enough for us. We can do away with a little bit of membrane. So our Jaculus has a family, or at least an ancestor. Luckily for us, the remains were found around Poland and Central Asia, so we can assume that even with the shifting continents, the Jaculus ancestors did not move much. We still need some modifications that happened between the Triassic and now. For one, we need a more prominent tail to really sell the snake aesthetic. At around 40 cm, it's also on the smaller side. Then we also need to find out why it attacks people and if it can even kill one. Let's tackle the size first. While it is small for a snake, it is also quite large compared to Draco lizards, which would be close to them in terms of lifestyle. Charopterygidae do have an advantage though, which is their massive and strong hind leg, for their size that is. They can better generate initial velocity and start their gliding from higher up compared to their position while grounded, which means that even at their larger size, they are not just barely scraping by in the air. Now, I would very much like to make them longer at least, but with the modifications I'm about to make elsewhere, I fear we would just make them too heavy to effectively do what they are known for. In fact, even 40 centimeters might be too big, but I need accurate models to calculate that, and I'm simply not up to that task. Let's just roll with the default. So what I really want to do is to transform the original rigid tail to something prehensile. Not to the level of a chameleon, but closer to that of a capuchin monkey. Something that can assist in climbing and positioning themselves for a glide. Perhaps even give them safety when hunting, ensuring they do not fall if they do not mean to. Is this feature necessary for such an animal? No, absolutely not. Lizards, animals they resemble in many aspects, are great climbers as they are, but they are not quite like the Jaculus, are they? They are great at moving along a plane, like climbing up a wall or a tree trunk, but have much more trouble moving between branches or clearing gaps. The long, extendable hind legs of the Proto-Jaculus already present more mobility without having to stick to a surface. However, such maneuvers, rearing up and grabbing onto another platform, may make them prone to fall, unless they can use their tail not only to balance and steer, but also to grab and secure. So we know why it would be good, but what is the drawback? In order to facilitate prehensile movement and adequate strength, more muscles and different tailbones are required. The holotype shows a rather rigid structure, one that would not be able to wrap around a branch. It has the bare minimum muscle mass to serve its purpose and as thin bones as possible. I've already mentioned capuchins, which would be a model we could follow, along with chameleons to an extent. There are plenty of prehensile tails among lizards, but those generally move horizontally as they do not serve this specific purpose. However, we shouldn't forget that a constantly bent tail is suboptimal for gliding as it throws off balance and creates unnecessary air resistance, slowing down the animal. As I do not aim to mimic this posture, it should not be a one-to-one. A fully stretched out tail should be a possibility and not a difficult feat. The reason for this is that the bend, paired with the fact that the tail would no longer be rigid, would mean that the Jaculus likely has to actively stretch out its tail when gliding, else it would just flop. So we need relatively strong muscles at the top and even more so at the bottom, which means more weight. Paired with the need to exert more energy while airborne and the necessity to keep the tail in position, the Jaculus would likely be a more cumbersome glider than its predecessors, but it would be a better climber, capable of navigating more difficult layouts and do so without risking an unfortunate fall. While they are gliders, losing their balance and plummeting towards the ground could be a problem. If they fall at the wrong angle, which are most angles, or they hit something on the way down, that could mean anything from minor bruises through injuries to death. Therefore, such a safety net is absolutely not superfluous, especially for a relatively large glider. Anyway, speaking of death, what about the apparent deadliness of the Jaculus? Well, fortunately for us, the Jaculus is the one where venom plays no role in the killings. While there are venomous lizards, it would be difficult to justify such a weapon for a creature that likely hunts invertebrates, potentially with the occasional egg on the side. Make no mistake, venom is a weapon. Poison is the defense mechanism, which would be slightly less awkward to explain. Slightly, as the massive jumping leg wing is quite a defense tool already. In any event, what we really need is a reason for the Jaculus to even attack people and some way they can kill. For obvious reasons, stabbing with the tail or reaching deadly velocity are out of the question, so we will have to deviate from the lore there. But let's start with the reason, as that could give us insight for the means as well. So we have a very fragile lizard with no but a few small claws as natural weapons. Fragile lizards that can lose their ability to glide very easily. Now, thanks to our modification to the tail, it's not as much a death sentence as it would be for a Charopteryx. Unless a leg breaks, of course. This is not going to be easy now, is it? Just like we did for the Itzcuintli, there is the option to make them very territorial, but the rodent dog was far more robust. Additionally, if they nest on trees, why would they attack people going about their business underneath? Wouldn't it be more logical to just lie low and wait for them to pass, as opposed to bringing their attention to them and their eggs? So this is out of the question, which means there is only one remotely believable option left beyond making it fake lore within our fake lore. They hunt insects. Insects such as mosquitoes or flies. Insects that actually seek out people because they want something from them. Insects that often fly close to said people. I think you can see where I'm going with this. Accidents. Well, kind of. The Jaculus leaps at their target without taking into account that they might hit the clueless mammal underneath. The prey is too close for a course correction, so they lightly collide, then try to jump away as soon as possible. might not be a common occurrence, but even just one such accident is enough to leave an impression, figuratively more so than literally. It wouldn't be very deadly now, would it? No, not unless you fall and hit your head on a rock or something. Possible, but not plausible, and I'm not going to rely on coincidence twice. So what is the answer? Exaggeration. It would be easy to see this critter as a snake, not in small part due to the change of its tail. If we make the head a bit more snake-like, that would also help a lot. Not too short, as a longer jaw gives reach, but we could lose some of the accrued extra weight this way. Now, if people believe snakes are jumping out of the tree at them, given humans' natural fear of the critters, it would be easy to assume they do so with the intent of killing. The Jaculus is not venomous, that much is evident. There are no bite attempts. Maybe they want to use that stiff tail or kill with blunt force. Whatever the case, snakes, flying or not, cannot be up to anything good. So, yeah, it's more of a reputation sort of thing. I know, but I don't think there are any other options. We could extrapolate this creature to be the cause for tales of sirens, the symbol of the python, the misidentification of tree-dwelling snakes as flyers. Most monsters I mentioned during the first half. The winged serpent of Arabia might also simply be another species of the genus, one that is specialized for frankincense trees and has to be smoked out of its nest before harvest can begin. Now there would actually be a reason for aggression, even if their tools to cause harm are limited at best. Ibises killing them might be a stretch simply for the feeding habits of the birds, but also possible on occasion. Not to the degree of a landmark level graveyard though. So, two flying snakes with one spec evo design. Cute and not in the least bit deadly. The lore might not be extremely detailed and we might not know the exact range these critters appear at, other than the vague idea that they are European, but we can mostly discern these ourselves. Being relatively large reptiles with a membrane that provides a large surface to gain or lose heat on, the southern reaches of the continent are the most likely. Then there is also the requirement of forests, preferably with high trees. Beech and oak forests are safe bet, but a lot of deciduous species would work well enough. Winter this far from the equator is a fact of life, so a hibernation period is a must for an ectotherm animal. However, it is tangibly more difficult to find a safe hiding place at 40 centimeters than it would be for the average sized lizards of their habitat. That being said, the prehensile nature of their tail does help expand the range of suitable crevices and holes. Frankly, the legs are more of a problem, requiring some awkward positioning in many cases. Granted, I don't think this is a deal breaker. Awkward does not mean impossible or implausible. And with that, that's all the most important aspects accounted for. One of the weirder creatures we've made, even though it's just a minor variation on an extinct animal. I really don't have anything else to add here. Usual links in the description, I guess. Check them out if you feel like it. And that's it for now. Bye. Ugh.